Hello and welcome to the show. Tonight I feel like I say a special guest every night, but all my guests are special. Tonight I have my friend Houngan James. Hello, James.
Hey Ben, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Not too bad, and absolutely thrilled that you reached out and asked me to participate in the summer series you're doing, and I'm glad to be a part of it.
Oh, well, I mean, you didn't have much choice to say no. I mean, it would have been a little awkward, wouldn't it?
This is true. This is true, and I'm sure this subtle pressure would have started.
Subtle pressure, subtle pressure. So, for those of you who don't know who Gan James is, so I've known James for what, about almost 5 years now. I think it is something like that.
Yeah,
We
sounds
met
right.
online originally, and so Ungan James is a Nova Scotia-based Ungan Asogwe of religion of Haitian Voodoo. He undertook Hanzo in 2017 in the lineage of La Fraîcheur Belle Fleur Guinéenne, just north of Port-au-Prince in Haiti. Apart from his day job, James runs the website Law and Order and engages in teaching and attending events across North America. And James, you're actually just freshly back a couple of weeks ago from Miami, aren't you?
Close to Miami, Central Florida.
Central Florida, yeah. So, I guess really the first thing to start with is um, you, you as a person, you evolved over the past couple of years. You've been involved in Haitian Voodoo since was it 2015 now?
A little
A
longer,
little
closer
longer.
about 2010, 2011.
2010, 2011. And your background, though, is in ceremonial magic and Gardnerian Wicca, isn't it, originally?
Oh yeah. So
Yeah.
so it was a bit of a trip. When I started off, it was go way back in the before times, 1989.
Mm.
When I was in my early teens, and I always, like so many folks, had a huge interest in the occult, magic, things like that, which led me towards reading, trying to read ponderous things like Israel Regardie's book on the Golden Dawn, which is just painful. Um, but a lot of things at that age, kind of exploring and digging into more, coming out of an interest in mythology I had when I was younger. Um, Eventually, this led me on through neo-paganism being what was present around me at that time, and what was starting to build a presence here in Nova Scotia. And that took me towards my big streams at that point were Gardnerian Wicca was what I got involved with it for a while, and also Hermetic Kabbalah, um, which of course the Golden Dawn, Dion Fortune, Israel Regardie, all that sort of crew of folks. And those kind of formed the linchpins, the central points of my practice and my spiritual growth at that time.
Mhm.
Um, but I always had a strong feeling and a strong draw towards voodoo. There was something visceral about it, about the drums, about the spirits themselves, right? There was so much to it that drew me, even if I couldn't understand
Mhm.
um, really what the nature of that call was. But living in Nova Scotia, as I do, there's not much of a Caribbean community here, let alone a Haitian community. As the last census, the African Canadian population in Nova Scotia is only about 21,000 out of about a million people right now. It used to be much larger. People move west for work and so on as things go. But being an academic by nature and a scholar by nature, I read as much as I could.
Yes.
But as I'm fond of saying, you can learn about voodoo from books, but you can't learn voodoo from books. And I recognize that. So in the late 90s, I managed to talk to one of Max Beauvoir's daughters on ICQ, being the old chat program of the day.
ICQ. Wow, ICQ.
Like taking us back. I stumbled across her on ICQ. We had some good conversations. She gave me a little bit of advice, some pointers, things like that.
Mhm.
And she had told me that, if this is the road that's meant for you, it's going to open for you at the right time.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, by this time, the internet was in full swing. But a lot of the information that was out there on Haitian practice, on Voodoo and things, that was not great. There were a few websites, very kind of GeoCities looking,
Yes.
that era kind of website where people were largely self promoting. Um, but you didn't really have access to a large enough community to vet these folks and say that can I trust this person? What can I find out? And a few bad experiences with people whose first conversation with me was how much money can I get from them?
Right. Right.
That kind of pushed me back. So I continued on with my other practices, waiting for that door to open. And eventually the time came where I said, you know what? Everybody says start with leg bar. I'm just going to start. I may not know what I'm doing correctly. I may be piecing something together, but we'll see what comes out of it. So I started a little altar for leg bar, and I started piecing together as best I could, taking advantage of the advice I'd been given by folks involved, and the door started to open. at that point there. I started finding things that had occurred in dreams years before, symbols I had seen in dreams or figures I'd seen in dreams who I couldn't identify were suddenly very clear. I'd come across a book detailing ritual art in Voodoo, you know, veves and so on, and I'd recognize a symbol and say, oh, that was the one I've been wondering about that was in my dream from those years ago. So it turned out that even while I was slowly fumbling my way towards the Loa, they were already sitting there and kind of speed it up, boy.
Yes,
We're waiting.
yes.
But for those doors opened at the right time. Yeah, practice kind of.
Oh, sorry,
yeah, go ahead.
Well, so I find it interesting that you started out that way because I mean, as you know, I have experience with the Cumian Espiritismo, and of course I dated the Voodoo Assan as well. And you started out doing all the things that now a lot of people say don't do, right? Back then, were you, I mean, I'm assuming there, right? But back then, when things were starting to open up for you and you were taking advice from ICQ and these figures online, is there anything that you would tell yourself now that you were doing back then that would change things for you, do you think?
Well, certainly. Hindsight's always 2020. And I
Totally.
can look back and see myself fumbling early on and say, well, maybe this wasn't the smartest way to approach it. But I do think if the Lawal wants you involved or the Orisha wants you involved in the Kumi or something like that, that initially they're not going to expect a high level of ritual knowledge from you. You haven't had the opportunity to get it yet, but the effort and the sincerity becomes part of it to demonstrate that you are not a tourist and that you mean what you're doing. And if you can demonstrate that, then they're going to lead you towards the right folks. They'll bring the right folks around you. They'll bring the right influences, the right teaching, the right instruction, which of course brings with it your need to adhere to that, to take advantage of what you're being taught, and to actually do your best to learn and grow. You may have been half-assing it before, and that may have been forgiven, but now when you have the opportunity to do it correctly, it's not time to half-ass it anymore.
Right. And so with your practice then, and I apologize, I cut into your story, but with your practice then, at what point would you say that turning point came to you, like that understanding came to you that, okay, now I'm actually here and I need to take this not more seriously, but I have more responsibility here?
Well, once I started speaking with actual Houngans and Mambos,
Right.
you know, at that point, and getting much more of an insider view of what was going on, a deeper understanding of things, and the broad brushstrokes of how this whole wide cultural tradition works. You know, it takes time before you get down to the finer detail, but those broad brushstrokes start to teach you that here I am. My social location is a white appearing Canadian, born and raised in Canada. The cultural
Wait,
lens through which
are you white, James? What?
Joking. Don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody. It's a source of shame and embarrassment. You know,
Sorry,
but the
James,
cultural
continue.
lens, the cultural lens through which I see things is, of course, Canadian. You know, and specifically East Coast Canadian and so on. And those cultural lenses are not the ones through which these traditions like Voodoo and Lakomi and other ATRs developed. So you find there's a lot of changing of your own attitudes and your own viewpoints that have to happen, especially with your regard to how you're going to function within a Voodoo house. It's a simple fact that in ATRs, you know, hierarchy is a thing. You do have elders, right? And there's a certain level of respect and a certain approach towards your elders that you need to have. That's something that's not really found in the generalized pagan community, where we tend to be far more individualistic, far more, do-it-yourself spirituality, and ATRs are not that, right? So there's a lot of personal deprogramming that has to occur, and a lot of sometimes swallowing pride, and learning to understand that if you're going to approach a tradition like Haitian Vodou, you need to approach it like a Haitian does, which means you need to learn how a Haitian approaches it. It's not something you can pick and choose from. And it's not something you should want to pick and choose from. You should want it all or want none of it.
Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense, and definitely something that I felt in my relationship with Lukumi, although I'm no longer as connected with it as I once was. That key piece around getting the cultural aspect, that understanding that there's no distinction between religion and culture. Culture is religion, religion is culture. And what is that
Right.
famous saying, right? What is it? 50% Voodoo, 50% Catholic,
Oh, it's that Haiti, Haiti's 80% Catholic, 20% Protestant, 100% Voodoo.
right? Mm-hmm.
You know, and when I first went to Haiti, I was looking at signs in the airport. There were just advertisements up for local like clothing manufacturers and so on, and you would see what would be the equivalent of a corporate logo or a small business logo that drew on the same artistic tradition as the veves we trace
Right,
to
right.
call spirits. You know, it would be a veve that looks like a particular one, but is being retooled and repurposed um,
Mm,
as a corporate logo, drawing upon the cultural tradition. Right, and you're right. Religion is not separable from culture. We have this conceit in North America where we categorize things as religion. Well, this is church and this is this and this is that. And that's it. That's just church. You can do that Sunday. You can go off and do what you do the rest of the time. But that just means we're ignoring the legacy of Catholicism, for
totally.
example, in the development of Western law, what we consider culturally acceptable and not acceptable morally and ethically ultimately roots back to that sort of thing. And of course, it runs through everything, you know, art, history, literature, music, philosophy. Everything is touched in by spirituality. So when we come into voodoo, it's something we have to accept. We can't separate it and categorize it out the way we think we can with Catholicism or Christianity as a whole in Canada, the United States. And we can't separate those out either, but we like to pretend we can. But that conceit is something that doesn't really hold any sort of water when it comes to Haitian voodoo. It's all in your face and it's a way of life.
I love that foreshadowing around water. We're going to get to water in a little bit, but so we're getting ahead of ourselves. So you let's take it back to your youngish punk kid, right? Set up an altar to Elegba, sorry, not Elegba, Elegba. And you've started to practice, and now you're starting to realize that things are becoming real, that there's more responsibility with this. You're actually speaking to real life voodooists. And so I'm curious then, what started to shift for you? How did then that progression change for you?
Well, life started to change.
Yes.
You know, doors opened more easily. I didn't expect to open, especially when it came towards moving towards this particular tradition, and that became a big deal. I had known from readings that I'd gotten from Hugon's Mambos that I was expected to initiate, but I had never thought to ask to what level. You know, am I going to be a hunsi, you know, where I'm assisting with things, or do I need to go into priesthood? And eventually that came out priesthood. And to be honest with you, I wanted to avoid it. You know, there's a lot of responsibility that comes with it, a lot you have to do. And you know, once you're a priest, if it's the middle of the night and they wake you up and they want that candle lit or that cookie brought or that drink offering poured, you've got to do it. You know, get up, move it, move it.
Absolutely.
And I had learned enough at that point to understand that that sort of obligation was going to be there. So I wanted to avoid it. And what happened as I was coming up towards Kanzo without realizing it was I was still serving Legba and a few other spirits that I had been taught to serve by this point who were present with me. I had said to Legba, I know that you guys are pushing me towards this, but I can't afford it. Kanzo's expensive. So I'll tell you what, you pay for it and I'll go. Now, I thought I was clever, right? Oh, there's no way they're going to be able to come up with that money and just make it happen. And
Right.
so I thought, I'm just getting out of it. I'm being so friendly about it. Yeah, I'm willing. I'm willing. I just can't afford it. And then within 6 weeks, they dropped the money in my pocket. Exactly what I needed for not just the ceremonies, but everything I needed to bring, my airfare, everything, right to the penny. And being a man of my word and knowing that it would be a bad idea to not do it,
Yeah.
I took the opportunity and I went. And looking back on it now, I'm glad I did. There is a lot of obligation to it, and there's a lot you're required to do and a lot of things you're required to learn. But it's become such an important part of my life, functioning as a Hugon, that I can't imagine really what life was like before it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's a certain there's a certain physiological, spiritual change. I know you can't speak to those secrets and those mysteries, and I'm not asking you to, but there is a certain change that also happens, and with that comes certain those responsibilities, right?
Right. Well, as far as I'm concerned, any true functioning, legit, effective initiation, regardless of the tradition it happens in, is going to bring this change and transformation. Joseph Robichaud, who runs a very excellent group on Voodoo right now, how was it he put it recently? He was talking about Kanzo. He said, "You don't come out of Kanzo with anything you didn't bring in the first place," right? But he talks about a little bit more about how what really happens, and he's right about it. What really happens is it's like defragging yourself. Same way you defrag a hard drive, things are rearranged or things are accessed or maybe easier for you to access. But you're not coming out with phenomenal cosmic power. You're coming out retooled and re-prepared for what you're supposed to do. And so those changes do certainly occur. Not changes in the sense that people expect, where I'm going to go in the Javo, a mere mortal, and I'm going to come out with phenomenal cosmic power like the genie in Aladdin.
Right.
You know, it doesn't work that way. But you come out with, or you should come out with, a renewed sense of self, a renewed sense of purpose, and a renewed focus and greater sense of direction in what you're supposed to do.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think my sense as a Westerner is a lot of Westerners tend to look at these traditions as being what you just described it, as being a initiation is the be all and end all, right? It's going to change your life forever in all these positive ways, and it's just going to be wonderful and just incredible, right? There's not quite that understanding that not only do you need to work towards it, but you also need to work afterwards, right? You know.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Initiation, I like to describe it to people as medical school.
Mm-hmm.
So you've gone into Jabo, you've gone through your ceremonies, you've been initiated, you're a Houngan Mambo. You have now been accepted into medical school. You're not a doctor,
No.
you know. You've been accepted. Now you have a lot of learning to do. Excuse me, a lot of growing. Tremendous amount of things you need to internalize. You need to come to understand. A lot of practice, and then eventually you can get to the point where you're functioning as a doctor. And the same thing applies in these ATRs. We don't come out newly minted priests who are capable of running off and doing everything. And you find that problem with some folks where they come out, they take off, and you're never going to see them at a ceremony again, never see them at a fete again. But immediately they're presenting themselves as the grand poobah of everything, right? There's a great song called "Woman with the Tattooed Hands" by Atmosphere, a great hip hop track, in which he has a line I love where he says, "I have a lot to teach, but I've got even more to learn." Mm-hmm. And that's really the proper attitude when it comes to ATRs, because no matter how much we learn, these are entire cultures. There's always going to be so much more to learn. And that ego needs to stay aside, because I know from my own personal experience and stories from other Houngans and Mambos that the more ego you try to bring into that game, the more those spirits push you down. Off of that too, right? They will bring you to your knees. Well, I know we'll talk about my marriage in a little bit, but back in December, I went to a fete Freda with my same friends in Central Florida. And Danto had been waiting for this marriage since 2017. And I hadn't done it yet. And she had no problem putting me down on my knees in front of everybody, waving that dagger around and just giving me straight hell about why I hadn't done it yet. Now, I hadn't gone up towards her with any overt, bombastic arrogance, but I had come in with a little bit of that personal arrogance where, I promised this in 2017. I haven't done it yet, but hey, I'm just going to strut around here. It's okay. I'll go up and say hello to her, and nothing will happen. But she showed me I was wrong, right?
It's I'm reminded of things that some of my former godfathers, Arisha, said during readings, and very similar approach, right? Yeah. So I'm okay. We're gonna get to the marriage because
that's going to be a habit for you. Marriage.
It's going to be a horrible habit now. I'm so sorry. It's all the people who keep sharing this. I'm like, I'm curious for obviously we have a lot of Voodooists and Haitian Voodoo people listening right now, but we are probably also going to have a lot of people who don't know anything about these traditions before. Can you explain in the best way that you know how? Because I know you know how. what is it like to be in front of an incarnate spirit that has come down in possession? Because I think a lot of my listeners are probably going to think of spirits in the archetypal way. And I mean, I've certainly witnessed possession myself. It's a visceral experience. It's a beautiful experience. It's a scary experience. But I'm curious for you, how can you explain it to people who don't understand that these are not just archetypes?
Well, that's the hard part.
I know, right? I know.
When it comes down, because it is a thing in the Western mystery tradition right now, in a post, psychoanalysis way, a post Freud, post Jung, especially post Jung, sort of way people want to talk about spirits as being part of the psychological model of magic. These spirits aren't independent things; they're just parts of my personality. Blah 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 blah, and that's not how it is in ATRs. We don't view spirits in that way. These spirits are very visceral, as you mentioned, but they are distinct beings with their own unique personalities. They are who they are. It's almost completely shoving aside the reality of what it is, to try and say that they're just archetypes. They're not. We could talk about like Ogu Farai as fitting the archetype of the warrior, which is present in every society, but we have to stop at that point without trying to wash him down or water him down and say that he is the equivalent of Ares or the equivalent of Mars or the equivalent of Thor. He's not. He's Ogu Farai. As for what it's like to stand in front of these spirits, it's got a two-pronged thing. On the one, you have this incredible sense that this is a spirit who's just possessed somebody. I'm watching him hold burning rum and Florida water in his hand without flinching. Or I'm seeing this little old man who's been hobbling along in a cane suddenly pick up a guy 4 times his size and carry him around on his shoulder. Or I've seen folks leap a vertical leap 8 feet in the air. You're seeing things occur that people can't do. So you have this sense of wonderment and amazement about it that's there, the sense that I am in the presence of something that is more than merely human. But at the same time, the other side of it is there's this sense of family, because you've gotten to know these spirits and you know them well, and they know you and they know who you are. So back in December, I stood there having a conversation with Ogu Farai while he held burning rum and burning Florida water in his hand like it was nothing. But he threw an arm around my shoulder and talked to me like old friends. And the way he reacted to me there was the same as he did at a fete in Mississippi in 2019, where he came and he possessed the priest and looked at me and, hey, and came up and gave me a big hug. So you see, that's another thing that indicates that these aren't archetypes, or these aren't just a person in a trance state that's just a human in a trance state, because nobody at this fete in December was present at that fete in 2019. Yet Farai's response to me was the same in both ways. It was unique and tailored to me, but it was the same, as if we were carrying on a conversation from before. So there is this great sense of wonder that I'm speaking to a spiritual being that is so much more than just human, but at the same time, I'm talking to somebody who's a friend, and I have built and cultivated this relationship with him. But he has built and cultivated it with me as well. So it's so much goes into it, that it really is a mystery with a capital M, something that's difficult to describe in simple terms to somebody who's never experienced it. And they'll never experience it necessarily just on their first time, because those relationships have to build. But that's where one of the fun things comes from being priesthood, is if we can guide people towards these experiences and help them see it, there's a real joy in watching people's experiences blossom.
Right? And the relationship build, right?
Right, the relationship building.
Absolutely. I'm glad that you mentioned the first time, because I'm really curious if you're allowed to say, and if you feel comfortable explaining, what was your first experience with possessed or a Loa that came down? What was that like? And may I ask, who was it?
Well, I want to say talk about the first one, because the first group of folks I attended, it was there were some complexities that go into it. But I'll talk about my first strongly visceral one. Okay. That was in Haiti, and it was Ogu Badagi, who was the chief spirit of the lineage where I did my consult. And he came into this guy, the ladies there called this fella Superman. He was a young, short, kind of cut guy, good shape, but small, right? And Badagi came into his head and immediately started doing Badagi things, strutting around, had his bottle of rum. But he did a challenge with me. He pulled me out of the crowd and made me put my arms up out to the sides, kind of at the Jesus Christ pose. And he stood in the same position, put his fists against mine, started to shove. And I understood, I'm dealing with an Ogu here. This is not a gentle thing. He's challenging, he's testing. So I started to shove back and just stared him in the eye, and I didn't blink and didn't look away. And I don't know how he didn't blink for as long as he went. But where the real visceral part of it came was while we were pushing, he spit rum in my eyes. Just blew a cloud of rum, and I could taste it. It was rum, strong rum at that. But my eyes weren't burning from the alcohol. And I thought, well, okay, you want to do this? I'm going to push hard. And everybody had told me, stand your ground with him, but I went beyond that. I pushed him and tried to back him up further, which he really appreciated. So this little fella hoisted me up, picked me up, and carried me around for a little while, showed me off, and then set me down. And Mambo there spoke a little English, leaned in and said, you did good, because if you had flinched when he spit that rum in your face, he'd have let your eyes burn.
Right.
And the fact that I could taste the rum and how strong it was and how pure it was, I mean, I knew there was some reason my eyes didn't burn. But you look back and it's these little moments like that where not only are they doing things like holding the fire in their hands, which you could maybe try and convince yourself this is a trance state, like people walking on hot coals. It's something about biofeedback or whatever. But when he does something to you and he blows that rum in your eyes and they don't burn, you're not the one in a trance state.
Totally.
Right. Mm-hmm. So you look at that and you say, okay, so there is something more to it. And that was one of the things that really, really plugged things in very, very strongly for me. Because my academic background is in religious studies, undergraduate and grad school, there's always that part of me that feels like Joseph Campbell, trying to overcome Joseph Campbell, where he had said he felt he would never have a true spiritual experience because he had divorced himself from religion and stood outside it as a scholar. So he looked at things as an outsider from a detached point of view. And it's those moments with the Loa that heal that kind of thing. Because we can take that back to Doreen Valiante in British Witchcraft, when she had said she got just enough of an education to hurt her practice. So somewhere between what Valiante said and what Joseph Campbell said is I can understand where that wound can come in, where we detach ourselves from spirituality, all in the desire to study it, from a detached point of view. But those little things like Badagi did there, those are healing in their own way. They're bringing you back in and deeper into a system and saying that this isn't something you can look at detached as an objective observer. This is something that you're in it now, son. Right.
You're experiencing it. Absolutely. And it's funny, I'm so glad that you brought in your religious studies background, because having religious studies background myself, I know that mind fuck of, oh, well, now we know all of the secret ways that all of these religions are based on each other and the psychological law and all that. And what happens? You move out of the experience and you move into armchair. You go and sit in an armchair and you atrophy, right?
Right.
It's fascinating, actually, relying on that background. It's fascinating when you actually look at spirit possession around the world. There is an eerie similarity between all of those traditions.
Right. You see things come up like in Bali or parts of Southeast Asia where they do spiritual possession occurs, and people drive needles through the cheek. Right, big needles, and eventually widen the holes like the handle of a shovel is tucked through, so on like that. But no bleeding, no pain, no suffering, no ill effects afterwards. One of the things I've always liked to tell people, both when I had witchcraft students back in the day, and when I talked about people about voodoo, is if you want to understand what's true or start to find out what's true, start looking at what's universal. Right. Because every one of us, every human being in the world knows what breathing is. They know what it's like to eat, what it's like to be thirsty. They know what water is. They know what fire is. They know what wind is. And no matter where you are, what culture, what climate you're living in, you experience all of these things, birth and death, and that's really where we have to start our quest for what's true. But those are where we find the connections between human experience as well. I don't think there's a religion in the world that doesn't have something to say about water and something to say about fire. They're universal. They're important. The rest becomes window dressing.
Totally.
But the important stuff are the fundamentals that we all deal with, right? And that, of course, we find everywhere. So Metagwe may not be the same as Poseidon, may not be the same as Neptune, may not be the same as any other god of the sea. But the fact is, any culture that's ever seen the sea has a god of the sea, right? Even though they're understood differently.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I love that image of window dressing because, on one level, that could potentially sound dismissive, but we're talking about individual traditions as individual homes, and that
Right,
window dressing is the personality of that home, right?
right. There's
Mm.
even to bring that in closer just towards voodoo itself. Um, every religion, every spiritual path has the problem with what I like to call the zealotry of the newly converted.
Yes.
You know, when people come to it and suddenly they want to decide they have all the answers now and they know everything. And when that manifests within the voodoo community, it's often because people are very attached to the house or the society they're part of, very attached to what they've learned and the way they do things. And it can be easy to start, you know, creating an us and them attitude. We do it this way, others don't. So the way I like to kind of look at that is Christmas as my metaphor and say, if in your house Christmas is celebrated with a Christmas turkey, you hang up stockings, you sing Christmas carols. The house across the street, they have a Christmas ham, they have a Yule log, and they put presents under a tree.
Mm.
So, well, who's doing Christmas correctly and who's not?
Totally.
Right. The truth is, nobody's doing Christmas incorrectly. It are just different family traditions, right? But everybody is still celebrating Christmas, you know. So the important thing there is to remember that that window dressing is important for where we are. It's important for the house that we're in, important for the group we're in, but it may not be exactly the same as the house across the street or the house next door. But diversity is strength in that regard.
Absolutely. And that's okay. That makes traditions stronger, that regionalism, that continuum of tradition.
Right.
And I mean, looking at voodoo, that permeates all lineages. I mean, there are lineages that use veves that are completely different from the one you were initiated into. And that's
Right.
okay. Mhm.
Right. You'll see, for example, one of the famous Veve you see if you look online is for a fellow Grand Bois, which had the spirit of the deep woods and spirit of the tree. And you find this kind of Sasquatch looking image where he has sort of a heart shaped face. And he looks very much like a Sasquatch.
Mhm.
The Veve we use in the lineage where I initiated is very different from that.
Mhm.
Um, for the most part, you tend to find certain key similarities. Freda
Mhm.
has a heart. You know, Legba, there's like a crossroads or a cane, things like that. Machetes may pop up in various Oku Veve. So you find similar shared ideas, core root concepts um, that should tell you something about who that Lawa is. But there's artistic embellishment on top of that. Just in the same way, you could have two people paint the same scene, but one guy may be an old master, one guy be an impressionist, and one guy be a surrealist, and their interpretation is going to be different based on who they are, what house they're in, basically. But at the same time, they're still painted from the same basic image. So you do find those differences that pop up. But I can't remember who told me recently, but it was a great quote I heard from somebody who said, "When elders disagree, it doesn't necessarily mean anybody's wrong."
Right. Mhm. Right. That makes total sense. That makes a lot of sense. It's funny how I think it's in these conversations when I start to realize how really Christian Western culture is with that idea of orthodoxy, right? That idea of right
Right.
belief and right practice, and even within like even within how we conceptualize scholastics or even just like regular life, right? I think that really holds us back because that sort of emphasis on right or wrong, black and white, what is and um, isn't found in a lot of cultures.
Right. And that goes back to what we were saying early on
Mhm.
about this conceit of thinking we can separate the influence of Christianity or Catholicism out from our culture. We can't,
Absolutely.
because
Yep.
the tentacles, the building blocks, the seeds are so widespread that
Mhm.
we don't even think of them as religious anymore, even though these things have been so influential in the way we approach everything.
Totally. Absolutely. So, with that being said, and understanding how many voodoo folk are listening to this conversation now, what would you say to somebody who is just starting out, who might be interested in voodoo, who isn't yet connected with a society? What would you say for them for to prepare themselves to decolonize themselves in a way? What would you suggest?
I'd first thing I'd point them to is if you're going to start looking at voodoo, look at things written by Haitians first, right? So you can start to over time start to develop an understanding of the way Haitians look at voodoo. not at the way outsiders, Frenchmen, Canadians, Americans have come in with their own cultural lens and express things that way. Start off with the Haitians. That's where you have to start. There's a great book called Nando Me, written by a Haitian woman. It's in Creole originally. And she presents kind of a face of voodoo that most people don't get to see. We usually see the Asson lineages. That's what we see. That's where I come from. That's what we see the most. But she presents more of a family line voodoo, studying under her aunts. And that provides a very different lens through which people can look. And it's not just voodoo. Look at Haitian history through what Haitian writers have to say. Look at Haitian music, Haitian art, so on. You have to build up until you get to a kind of a critical mass of understanding the Haitian way of approaching these things. That's going to be important to really contextualizing and understanding what happens at fetes, what happens, why the spirits do what they do, why the spirits act the way they act. These spirits are so much bigger than anything we can understand. And we know that when they come in possession, they have a certain way of acting. And those are cues. Those are social ritual cues to let us know who that spirit is. But the spirit is much bigger than that. So when you see Azili Freda come, and Freda walks around and she's very, charismatic and charming, and she struts about. If you assume that's all there is to Freda, that's where people start to get the Barbie doll image of her. Well, she walks around, she just glides about, she's got her perfume and everything. But those are just the social cues to let us know who she is. So we identify her correctly and serve her correctly. Who Freda is, disincarnate, is so much bigger and so much vaster than just that little fingertip, that she pokes into our world for us to deal with. And the same applies.
Absolutely.
Across the board, it's different law. And these are things that we're not really going to understand as non-Haitians unless we start to understand Haiti and Haitian culture through a Haitian lens. We're never going to have 100% understanding of it because we haven't grown up there and internalized it. But the point is not to trick ourselves into pretending we're Haitian when we're not, but to get ourselves to the point where we can approach Haitian culture, Haitian belief, Haitian practice, language, food, everything else as close as possible to the way Haitians do it.
That makes a lot of sense. That certainly resonates with my experience in Lukumi. That idea, and I mean, Oshun and Freda are not the same, but they fill a very similar niche. And people say the same things about Oshun as they do with Freda. Oh, she's coquettish, so she's this, she's like Aphrodite, she's all of these things, right? And when you actually get into or start to peel the surface, because there's no way that mortals can ever really see the vastness of these beings. When you start to peel away the surface, you start to see the depth of that. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and Oshun's a great example there. People look at her as being an Aphrodite, this goddess of love and beauty and so kind and so sweet. And then I'm sure they're shocked when a goat shows up and she cackles wildly and castrates it, right? That's not what I expected from Aphrodite. Well, she's not Aphrodite, and she's not an archetype that's just a love goddess that fits this. She is a complete being with her own personality, her likes, her dislikes, her desires, the things that attract her and repulse her. Fred is the same way. And that's why we need those cultural lenses. We really need to truly understand that these are not just analogs of the Greek gods. One I like to use is Agwe and Poseidon, because people will sometimes say, well, Agwe is the Haitian Poseidon. And I say, no, he's not. They're both spirits of the sea, yes. But there is context to Agwe that does not exist with Poseidon. We say that the dead go on Baudelaire under the water for a year after death, where they're cared for by Agwe and La Sirene. Well, that role of a psychopomp is not something that Poseidon does.
No.
Also, we use the metaphor of a ship going across the sea to the physical world of Guinea, Africa. That is also the metaphor we use for moving into the spiritual world. That transportation across the waves as being a metaphor for return to a primal place, a spiritual place, an Edenic place, is not something found in Poseidon. Poseidon is a wonderfully rich and interesting character on his own. He has rulership over horses and earthquakes and that too. But we see how different Agwe and Poseidon are when we look at who they are in their cultural totality. So we can't really sit there and say Agwe is Poseidon. We have to deal with the Haitian understanding of what a god of the sea is, and it's going to be different.
And I mean, even Poseidon isn't Poseidon when you think about it. I mean, the cultural understanding of Poseidon from 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, is so different from this Western Edith Hamilton, watered
Right,
down version, right? You know.
right.
Now, coming
Yeah,
back to Freda then. So you have a very strong relationship with Freda. You have a very special relationship with Freda. Did you want to
adore
speak
her.
about, yeah, right? And Lastivian too. Did you want to speak
And
about,
Danto.
and Danto, yes. Did you want to speak about those relationships?
Well, yeah, this will be a nice segue into the marriage as
Yeah.
well. Um, so there is the way I approach each of these three. I've written about them on my blog as well. What I call deep dives about them is I try to express the depth that they've shown me in
Mm,
themselves. So looking at Freda, for example, people talk about her as being coquettish, very much the Barbie doll, all that sort of thing. There's stories where people will say like she doesn't like dealing with women because women are threats to her. Nobody's a threat to Freda.
mm,
Um, as Mambo Mirsha, a very good friend of mine who performed my wedding ceremony, once pointed out to me, Freda's not viewing other women as rivals and being
mm.
standoffish because of that. Freda knows other women see her as the rival. And so they get that chip on their shoulder. So that's why Freda holds back a little bit, which is a subtle distinction from which a great deal flows. Um, I see Freda in almost a mystical sense as being the idea of attraction, defining love as attraction, and going far beyond simple, romantic love. We're drawn to our children. That's love. We're drawn to our parents as their children. That's love. But that's all on the emotional level. When we get down deeper into that, we get away from that emotional human side of things. In the physical level, the world of slugs and fish and rocks and feathers and all that, things are still attracted to each other. We call that gravity, right? So on the deep plane, what we might from a Western perspective say non-living physical level, that same energy that is Freda is expressed as gravity, right? Emotion is expressed as love, and so on and so on. So there's so much depth that's there because that sense of attraction is what binds the whole world together. Without that gravity, we don't have a planet to stand on. We don't have atmosphere. We don't have seas. So the way I joked about it in the article I wrote about her was Freda's wonderful feminine curves are equally the curve of space time.
Right, right.
So I find that there can be an incredible depth in how we choose to understand these. So now, do we want to go for the Barbie doll surface, or do we want to look deeper? And it always reminds me of one of the hadith um, stories that Muhammad had left behind that weren't part of the Quran, but stories of things he said or did. And he was asked at one point, why did God create everything? And Muhammad said he was a hidden treasure and he wished to be known. And I think with the Loa as well, because of their depth, because they have personality, they're not mere archetypes. They want us to know them as well, but they're going to have us know them only to the degree that we're capable of understanding them, which, as you mentioned earlier, is limited based on us being
Yes.
human beings. But for Freda, I see that vastness. And for Danto, part of what I see with Danto is that sacrifice is at the heart of who she is. I mean, she waged the Haitian Revolution. She
Mm,
fought and she suffered and she bled and came through the other side as a queen. But I define sacrifice in her context as love in action.
right,
Love
right.
doing something. Because of course we say Freda and Danto are sisters. We can take a surface level view of that, almost Olympian, and just say, well, this being had these two daughters and da da da. But I think when we say they're sisters, what we're saying is there is a relational connection between them. There's something that connects them, and we express that talking to them as siblings. Same way we talk about Dambala and Aida being connected. Some people say they're brother and sister. Some people say they're husband and wife. Some people say they're two halves of a greater whole. So the interpretation is there. But for Danto, I see Danto as being sacrifice, which is love with a purpose that's doing its thing, fighting for what we care about. And again, I wrote a whole article about her on that. With La Sirene, we see a spirit where the crossroads really happen here, because La Sirene, as we understand her, we depict her, and we approach her, draws upon the ancient Greek idea of the siren. It draws upon European concepts. It draws upon African concepts of Mamiwata. So all these things have come together, just as Haiti was the crossroads of the world at its time, culturally, historically, militarily, economically. By the same token, all these different things were brought in. And so with La Sirène, we see a depth of complexity as well. My article about her, I talk about the mirror that she holds in her hand, where people say it's a symbol of vanity. And that concept of the mirror being vanity is a Catholic one, comes from the Middle Ages, where it's a symbol of vanity. I don't see it that way at all. La Sirène rules over water. And so the first mirror, a mirror is a portal, right? Mm-hmm. So the first mirror our ancestors ever beheld or ever dealt with was a pool of still water, long before we could ever figure out glass. So I see La Sirène being a queen who rules over water. When she's holding that mirror in her hand, you could call it vanity if you don't understand what she's doing. She is looking at herself, but she's literally looking at herself into the depths of herself and who and what she is. And in English, we even say this. When we talk about wanting to understand ourselves, we say self-reflection. Right. We reference the mirror. The mirror is itself just a portable pond of still water that we've learned how to carry with us. So with La Sirène, I see a concept of revelation that she carries with her, where she will help us to see the depths. We have the metaphor there of the sea, where what's deep beneath the sea can be brought to the surface again, be it treasures or be it those who have passed away, and she rules over all of that. So that level of complexity is really there with each Loa as well. And it just depends how far back do you want to peel those onion layers. And there's levels far beyond what I've discussed. And
absolutely.
As far as I may go in my life, there's always going to be further levels, right? It's an infinite thing.
Which brings us to your marriage, because I mean, that taking that step, and for those who are unfamiliar, when we say marriage, this is a spiritual dynamic. This is a spiritual marriage. This is another form of initiation, is it? Would that be a good way of explaining it?
I would say it is on a personal level. Like when we conjure or we take any initiation that makes us a priest, we're taking on responsibility outside of ourselves, responsibility to community, to the société or the house that we've joined. We are defined relationally outside ourselves in what we're supposed to do. But a marriage, when we marry the spirits, that is strictly about yourself and your own spirits.
I see.
Right? It does not take on outside context for anybody else, and nobody else is involved in it. It's you and your spirits. So for me, Danto would come to visit me in Haiti in 2017 and had made it very, very clear to everybody present that she wanted to marry me. So of course it took me so long to get around to it, and I got my butt kicked a little bit about it. But I knew we all have some big spirits with us. I have a big Agwe, a big Dambala, a big Ogu. And these are almost masculine versions of the energy, to use what is today considered a problematic binary. But I use it for simplicity's sake. I have these potent male energies in me, each one of which lines up with one of the three Loa I married. Right. So I see it from a mystical sense, or almost an alchemical sense, as being a balancing of those energies, the masculine portion within me balanced with the feminine portion of the corresponding spirit. There's much more to it. That's just a personal interpretation. But they made their presence known for the wedding. So Mambo Mirsha and her husband O'Neill, fantastic folks. And Mirsha's sister Alex, phenomenal woman. These folks got together with Mirsha's house, and everybody got together to perform the ceremonies. Another wonderful lady came to marry Three Loa herself. And happily, we combined this into one big mega fete. So everything was set up, and a few hours before the ceremonies were due to begin, you got rain the way you only get in the deep south or central Florida, just came pouring down. And a small spot on the top of when the tent started to leak, and it was like a faucet running, just a steady stream of water coming down directly next to La Sirène. Nobody else's altar got wet. Nobody else got touched. It was just water right next to the mermaid. So we took advantage of that. We washed our hands, our feet, our heads in that purifying water. And it came once everything been purified and cleaned, the rain stopped. The warmth came out again. So I won't talk too much about Dambala and Ogu and Cousin coming, because that's not my story to tell. That's the story of my sister who got married. But for me, the first one to come was La Sirène. And in my dreams, she's always, each of these three comes to me differently in dreams. La Sirène always comes erotically. Freda always comes for date night, you know, like walking with Marjorie Tyrell in Game of Thrones through the water gardens or something, or through some beautiful garden. There's very much a date night feel with her. And with Danto, it's very much the practicalities of daily life.
Right.
So across these three, they kind of give what you would want in a relationship, right? The eroticism of it, the love and the romance of it, and the practical side of things. So La Sirène came first, and you know, she cooed like a dolphin, you know, and I got to have my own time with her alone, just where we just spoke to each other, and then she gave blessings onto others who came. Freda came next, and of course, Freda came with her own way of doing things. My banner picture on Facebook right now is a shot from behind of my arm around Freda there. Freda came very, very loving, in that very loving and sweet way. And when Danto came, she came very matter of fact. And we sat and we talked. It was very much about, now we're going to do this, and now we're going to do that, and now we're going to do this.
Yes.
So of course and this once again shows that the reality of these spirits, because the Mambo and Houngan who ran the ceremony aren't privy to my dreams,
right,
and the way these three spirits act and really towards me. So they, you know, the skeptics out there who want to say people fake things like that obviously can't be faked, because they are acting exactly the way they do in my own internal monologue with my own internal landscape. But since then, I found that their presence is stronger for each of those three in my life, even stronger than spirits I've worked with for a long time. Right? Although I have worked.
Yeah. I was
You
going
said
to
again?
ask how that. I was going to ask about that. I was going to ask how that change in relationship has changed or impacted the relationships of some of your others.
It's I don't want to talk about it as if it has lessened my relationship with others. Those relationships are still moving along, you know, at their pace, and still moving along wonderfully. It's just these three happen to pour a little nitro in their gas tanks.
I see.
So nobody else's speed has changed except these three have accelerated ahead. The painful thing is as I married each one of them looked at me and said, "You know, I'm the only one. I'm your only one." Right? which of course is sure to bring some sort of complexity for me to deal with in the future. But we're all still very much in a honeymoon period right now. But yeah, I do feel that their presence a lot more strong, and they make their presence known externally.
Yes.
A lot more strongly now as well.
That's so powerful. That's so powerful. I've only ever known a couple of Voodoo who have married Garth. I don't know him, but I've heard stories of his marriage, and it's not as common as people would necessarily think in Voodoo, is it, to marry spirits?
Right. Some folks marry spirits as a stopgap measure to avoid taking on the responsibility of Kanzo. You know, so their spirits want you to initiate. You don't want to initiate and take on all that extra. So you can settle and compromise on at least focusing on that inner growth that's manifested through your marriage, without going and taking on the next step, or at least maybe delay it. But not everybody marries their spirits. It's not like I wouldn't say it's as common as human marriage.
Right.
But it does happen, and when those Lwa want to marry you, sometimes they may be willing to negotiate and accept something else in response, but other times, no. No, they know what they want. And that's what it's going to be. When Freda was at the marriage, excuse me, there were things that she did, little things that she did that were meant to be messages to me, or meant to be little secrets for me, that nobody else, the other Hougans and Mambos, saw what occurred, but didn't know the meaning of it. Until we talked about it the next day, and I could say, "Oh, I can explain that." And that's because in my dream, she does this. Once again, showing the reality of these spirits as not just being archetypes or merely trance states for human beings, because things that nobody else knew about that had occurred in my dreams were being directly referenced by these spirits sitting in front of me in a way that nobody else would understand unless I explained it. So that's another road that continues going on through life here. I live close to the sea. And usually each weekend I like to go down. I like to sit with the ocean spirits for a bit. Not that you're required to go to the sea, but you're close. Why not? And the sea life down there has been incredibly active in an area where it's usually pretty sedate. And this is the place I always go. So when I get down there, La Serena is always active in that sense of the sea life is present. I'm finding roses popping up everywhere, especially when I'm going around on Freda's day. There may be some rose petals just blow by for some reason, no idea where they came from.
Mm-hmm.
Some reason, right? So yeah, they are making their presence known, right?
That's beautiful. Wow. I when you first told me that this was happening and the excitement in even the texts that you were sending me, I could tell that this was something hugely important to you. I have a bit of a more maybe intimate question, and I swear I'm not going to try to, tell anything that's private here, but I know a few years ago you went through a rough period with your relationship to voodoo, and now you've just gotten married. I'm curious, what brought you back to voodoo?
I never really left.
Yeah.
What it was I had a period where we all get these sort of periods, I think, where that initial rush has come in, things are going really great, life is better, we're seeing the benefits of serving our spirits and everything's good. And then suddenly, either through our fault or the influence of people around us or whatever else is going on, we hit a rough patch in life.
Yeah.
And then we have to face up to the fact that being priests or being servants of the spirits or whatever we are does not guarantee us a smooth road through life. And you get sort of like San Juan de la Cruz called The Dark Night of the Soul. Sometimes you have to face those things. You have to start accepting that things that you thought were great or were good are not, right? There are changes that have to happen. It's a course correction for you. And the more you push against it, the more you self-pity, the harder it is to actually get your feet under you and adjust. So for me, it was a point where the years-long kind of rush and uplifting of initiating as a priest, where that particular road, that particular wave had kind of died down. And when I was in the lull before the next wave came to lift me up, started complaining that I couldn't see the horizon as well.
Right. Right.
So a lot of that was foolishness on my part, but it was also an opportunity to learn and grow. And once the next wave came and lifted me up again, I could see that I'm still further ahead than the last wave. And started to help me kind of realize and have a good chuckle at myself as well. I think that's one of the reasons it took so long for the marriage to happen. Was conjugal occurred, and I had to go through this trough in this lower period and bring me up to the right spot where I had grown and blossomed enough to be a proper husband to these spirits, right? Or properly be able to receive and take advantage of what they want to give me.
I love that. It reminds me of the Fiddler on the Roof song, one person's up in the air, one person's on the ground, and then they switch and they find very different places again, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful, James. James, thank you so much for coming on today and talking with us. I know I have certainly appreciated everything you've said, and I've appreciated you going a little bit deeper with some of my questions. I really appreciated that. Is there anything you think any of the listeners should know? Is there anything that you want to say to any of the listeners?
Well, for those of you who are interested in coming towards voodoo, a little bit of advice. Firstly, it is a fad right now. There are a lot of people being drawn towards voodoo. They want to come check it out. Do some soul searching first, because if you initiate, it's not something you can turn back from. It's not like joining certain witchcraft traditions where you can walk away and you're good. You take on obligations you don't get to avoid, so be careful about that. Shop around as well. There are a lot of houses out there, a lot of things, and sometimes because a house seems bright and shiny and really, really prominent, doesn't mean it is. Doesn't mean it's a good place. Don't necessarily be concerned about where your friends are. We're all like plants, which means we each need a different level of moisture, sunlight, different temperatures, and what is fertile soil for somebody may be, the worst thing for you, right? So look for the house that most suits you. And when you talk to people who are members of that house, remember they have a vested interest in making it look good. Talk to people who left as well, right? They may have a vested interest in making that house look bad, but you need to find the truth somewhere in the middle. So the biggest thing to understand here is if you're coming towards voodoo, you're coming towards a society or a group, is that it is a lifelong commitment. It's difficult to walk away and go to a different group. It's doable, but it's difficult. It's better to avoid that difficulty by simply making the right choice in the beginning. But above all, your spirits have got to come first.
Right. Thank you so much, James. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, you're very welcome, Ben. Thank you for having me on.
I'm kind of speechless, so I'm just going to end this by saying, first of all, thank you, James, for coming on again, and join us next week where I will have Craig Spencer, who is originally actually from very close to where my dad is from, in Lancashire in England, talking about his newest book and his own life journey through witchcraft. Again, thank you, James, for coming on, and thank you everybody who was joining us. Thank you for everybody who's joining us because of James, and I hope that you've enjoyed our chat today, and we will speak to you next time.